The cold October wind slapped against her face as she stood on the sidewalk, staring through the big glass windows of the fancy restaurant. Her stomach had been growling for the past 6 hours. When was the last time she actually ate a proper meal? 3 days ago, maybe 4. Time was starting to blur together. She pulled her thin jacket tighter around her body, but it didn't help much. The jacket had been fine for summer, but now that fall was here, it felt like wearing paper against the wind. Inside the restaurant, she could see people laughing, talking, enjoying their expensive dinners. The warm yellow light inside looked so inviting compared to the gray, cold street where she stood. Her name was written on a college ID card buried deep in her backpack, along with old sheet music and a photo of her mother. 23 years old, and somehow her entire life had fallen apart in just a few months. It wasn't supposed to be like this. 6 months ago, she had been a music student at one of the best schools in the country, full scholarship. Teachers said she had real talent, the kind that comes along once in a generation. Her future looked bright, clear, certain. Then her mother got sick. Really sick. The kind of sick that empties bank accounts and makes you drop everything else in your life. The kind of sick that makes you choose between your dreams and your family. She had chosen family. Of course she had. The scholarship was gone now. The apartment was gone. For the past 2 weeks, she had been sleeping in her beat-up old car, parked in different spots each night to avoid trouble. During the day, she tried to look normal, washing up in public restrooms, charging her phone at libraries, pretending everything was fine, but everything wasn't fine. She had exactly $17 left to her name. And in 3 days, the storage unit where she kept her most precious possession would lock her out if she couldn't pay the rent. That storage unit held her mother's old piano, the one she had learned to play on as a child. The thought of losing it made her chest feel tight. She looked down at her worn-out sneakers. There was a hole forming near the big toe of her right shoe. Her jeans had a coffee stain from yesterday or maybe the day before. She knew exactly how she looked. Desperate, broke, lost. Through the window, she could see a beautiful grand piano sitting in the corner of the restaurant. It was clearly expensive, probably worth more money than she had ever seen in one place. The polished wood gleamed under the soft lights. It looked perfect, untouched, like a museum piece. She had walked past this restaurant dozens of times over the past week. Each time she noticed that piano. Each time an idea grew stronger in her mind. A crazy idea, a desperate idea. What if she went inside and offered to play? What if she played something so beautiful that they would give her food in exchange? It sounded insane when she thought about it clearly. Who does that? Who walks into an expensive restaurant and asks to play piano for a meal? But what choice did she have? She was out of options, out of money, out of time. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. Her hands were shaking as she walked toward the door. Not from the cold this time. From fear, from nervousness, from the horrible uncertainty of what would happen in the next few minutes. They might laugh at her. They probably would laugh at her. They might call the police. They might throw her out onto the street. But they might also say yes. She reached for the heavy brass door handle. It felt cold under her palm. For just a second, she hesitated. This was it. Once she walked through that door, there was no going back. Everyone inside would see her, judge her, see exactly how far she had fallen. She thought about her mother, recovering now but unaware of how bad things had gotten. She thought about that piano in storage, the one she was about to lose. She thought about all those hours of practice, all those years of dedication, all that talent that was going to waste while she slept in her car. Taking a deep breath, she pulled the door open and stepped inside. The warmth hit her immediately. It felt like stepping into another world. The smell of fresh bread and roasted garlic filled the air. Soft jazz music played from hidden speakers. People sat at white cloth-covered tables dressed in clothes that probably cost more than her monthly rent used to be. Every instinct told her to turn around and run. She didn't belong here. Not anymore. But her feet kept moving forward, carrying her deeper into the restaurant, toward the host stand where a man in a perfectly pressed suit stood watching her approach. His eyes scanned her from head to toe. She saw his expression change. The polite smile faltered. His eyes narrowed slightly. She knew that look. It was the look people give you when they've decided you don't belong. Before he could say anything, before he could ask her to leave, she forced the words out. Her voice came out smaller than she intended, almost a whisper. Excuse me, I'm a pianist. That piano over there, if I play something beautiful on it, would you give me a meal? The words hung in the air between them. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The man stared at her like she had just spoken in a foreign language. Then slowly his expression shifted from confusion to something worse. Amusement. Around them conversations began to quiet. People had heard her. They were turning to look. She felt dozens of eyes on her, could almost hear the thoughts running through their minds. Who is this girl? What is she doing here? Is this some kind of joke? The warmth of the restaurant that had felt so welcoming just moments ago now felt suffocating. The lights seemed too bright. The walls seemed too close. She wanted to disappear, to sink into the floor, to be anywhere but here. But she stayed standing. She kept her eyes on the man at the host stand, waiting for an answer, hoping against hope that somehow, impossibly, he would say yes. The host's laugh cut through the quiet restaurant like a knife. It wasn't a kind laugh. It was the kind of laugh that makes your face burn with shame. Sharp, dismissive, the kind that says you're not even worth taking seriously. That piano, he said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear, is worth more than most people's cars. It's not some toy for street performers to touch with dirty hands. Her face went hot. She felt tears starting to build behind her eyes, but she forced them back. She would not cry, not here. Not in front of all these people who were now openly staring at her. A woman at a nearby table whispered something to her husband, and they both looked at her with pity. At another table, a younger couple smirked, clearly entertained by the scene. An older man shook his head and went back to cutting his steak, dismissing her entirely. She wanted to run. Every muscle in her body screamed at her to turn around and get out of there as fast as possible. But her feet wouldn't move. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was the fact that she literally had nowhere else to go and nothing else to try. Please, she heard herself say. And she hated how small her voice sounded, how broken. Just one song. If it's good, I eat. If it's not, I'll leave immediately. I promise. The host opened his mouth, probably to say no, probably to tell her to leave. But before he could speak, a door swung open from the kitchen area. A man walked out, wiping his hands on a towel. He was probably in his mid-40s, with gray starting to show in his dark hair. His chef's coat was spotless white. He must have heard the commotion because he was looking right at her with curiosity in his eyes. The host turned to him quickly. I'm so sorry, chef. This girl just walked in off the street and she's asking to play the piano for food. I was just about to escort her out. The chef didn't respond right away. Instead, he studied her. Really studied her. His eyes went to her hands, which she realized were clenched into fists at her sides. She slowly unclenched them, and his gaze focused on her fingertips. She knew what he was seeing. The calluses. The slightly flattened pads of her fingers from years of pressing piano keys. The small scars from that time she practiced so long she actually made her fingers bleed. These weren't the hands of someone who played piano as a hobby. These were the hands of someone who had dedicated their life to it. The chef was quiet for a long moment. The entire restaurant seemed to be holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen. She could feel her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone could probably hear it. Finally, he spoke. One song? The host looked shocked. But chef, the Steinway... One song, the chef repeated, his voice firm but not unkind. He looked at her directly now. If it's genuinely good, you eat. Whatever you want from the menu. If it's not... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. She nodded quickly, afraid he might change his mind. Thank you. Thank you so much. As she started walking toward the piano, she heard the whispers starting up around her. They weren't even trying to be quiet anymore. This should be interesting, someone said with a laugh. Poor thing probably can't even play. Another voice murmured. Why is he letting her do this? She's going to embarrass herself. I give it 30 seconds before she gives up. Each word felt like a small cut, but she kept walking, kept putting one foot in front of the other, crossing the restaurant toward that beautiful grand piano in the corner. The walk felt like it took forever. Every step was a battle against the voice in her head telling her to run away. When she finally reached the piano, she stood there for a moment, just looking at it. It really was beautiful. A Steinway, perfectly maintained, the black polish so perfect she could almost see her reflection in it. She reached out and gently touched the fallboard, the cover that protected the keys. Her hands were trembling. When was the last time she had played a real piano? Weeks, months. She had been practicing on a broken keyboard in her car, one with half the keys not working properly. But this was a real instrument. A perfect instrument. She carefully lifted the fallboard, revealing the ivory keys underneath. Even in her nervous state, she couldn't help but appreciate how beautiful they were. Clean, perfect. Exactly the right weight under her fingers as she tested a few notes. The piano was in perfect tune. Of course it was. This wasn't some cheap instrument. This was probably worth $50,000, maybe more. The sound it produced was rich and warm, even from those few test notes. She sat down on the bench, adjusting the height slightly. Behind her, she could hear someone snickering. She closed her eyes, trying to block it all out. The whispers, the judgment, the doubt she thought about her mother, about the hospital, about all those nights sitting by her bedside, writing music in her head because she couldn't afford to waste paper. She thought about the piano in storage, the one she was about to lose. She thought about every teacher who ever told her she had something special, and she thought about the fact that this might be her last chance. Her last chance to prove that all those years of practice meant something, that giving up her scholarship hadn't been for nothing, that she was still the pianist she used to be, even if everything else had fallen apart. The restaurant had gone completely quiet now. Even the kitchen noise had stopped. Everyone was watching, waiting, probably expecting her to fail, probably making bets on how quickly she would give up and run out the door. She placed her hands on the keys, finding the starting position. Her hands had stopped shaking. That always happened when she sat at a piano. No matter how nervous she was, no matter what was happening in her life, the moment her hands touched the keys, everything else faded away. She took one last deep breath and began to play. The first notes that came from the piano were soft, so soft that people had to stop talking completely just to hear them. It wasn't a famous piece. It wasn't something anyone in that restaurant would recognize. It was hers, something she had written during those long nights in the hospital, sitting beside her mother's bed. She had started composing it at 3 a.m, when the hospital was quietest, when the only sounds were the beeping of machines and the distant footsteps of nurses making their rounds. The melody had come to her fully formed, like it had been waiting inside her all along, just needing the right moment to come out. The piece started with a simple melody in the right hand, gentle, almost like a lullaby. But there was something else underneath it, a sadness, a weight. The left hand came in, adding deeper notes that made the melody more complex, more real. She had titled it, Waiting for Dawn, though she had never performed it for anyone. It was too personal, too raw. It was about hope and fear living in the same moment, about sitting in a hospital room, not knowing if the person you love most in the world would get better, about being scared and trying to be brave at the same time. The snickering stopped first, then the whispered comments. Within the first 30 seconds, the entire restaurant had gone completely silent. Not the awkward silence from before. This was different. This was the kind of silence that happens when something unexpected captures everyone's attention at once. Her fingers moved across the keys with increasing confidence. The muscle memory was still there, even after all these weeks away from a real piano. Her hands knew exactly where to go, exactly how much pressure to apply, exactly when to let a note ring out and when to cut it short. The melody began to build. What had started as something gentle and simple was growing into something bigger, more complex. The right hand climbed higher on the keyboard while the left hand laid down a foundation of rich, rolling chords. The two hands were having a conversation, telling a story without words. She could feel it now. That thing that happened when she played really well. It was like she wasn't controlling her hands anymore. The music was flowing through her and she was just the channel for it. Her body swayed slightly as she played, moving with the rhythm and emotion of the piece. The chef who had given her permission to play was leaning against the bar now, his arms crossed over his chest. But his expression had completely changed. The skepticism was gone. His mouth was slightly open, his eyes fixed on her hands as they flew across the keyboard. He had expected competent playing, maybe, something decent enough to justify giving her a meal. He had not expected this. At table 7, an elderly woman had her hand pressed to her chest. Her eyes were closed and tears were running down her cheeks. She wasn't crying from sadness exactly. It was something else. The kind of tears that come when something beautiful hits you right in the heart, when music reminds you of something you had forgotten or thought you had lost. A man in an expensive suit at the bar had pulled out his phone, but not to text or check emails. He was recording. His hands were shaking slightly as he held up the phone, trying to capture what was happening. The host who had laughed at her just minutes ago was gripping the edge of his podium, his knuckles turning white. He had grown up in Vienna. His parents had taken him to concert halls there as a child. He hadn't thought about those times in years. Had forgotten what it felt like to hear music that transported you somewhere else entirely. But he remembered now. In the kitchen, the line cooks had stopped working. They were crowded in the doorway, still holding their spatulas and ladles, their fancy dishes forgotten on the counter. One of them, a young guy barely out of culinary school, had never really understood classical music before. He thought it was boring, something old people listened to. But this didn't sound boring. This sounded alive. The piece moved through several movements, each one revealing a new layer. There was a section in the middle that was almost angry. The notes crashed together, loud and powerful. The kind of playing that made the crystal glasses on nearby tables vibrate slightly. This was the fear part. The anger at unfair situations. The frustration of being helpless. But then it softened again. The anger gave way to something else. Not quite hope, but acceptance maybe. Understanding. The melody from the beginning came back, but changed now. Wiser. Like it had been through something hard and come out the other side different but not broken. Her whole body was involved now. Her shoulders, her back, even her breathing was in sync with the music. When the piece called for power, she leaned into the keys using her whole body weight. When it called for gentleness, she barely touched the keys at all, coaxing the softest possible sound from them. Nobody in that restaurant was eating anymore. Forks rested on plates, wine glasses sat untouched. Conversations that had been happening before she started playing were completely abandoned. Every single person in the room was focused on her, on the music pouring out of that piano. The chef found himself thinking about his own mother, who had passed away 5 years ago. She used to play piano too, not at this level, but she loved it. He had sold her piano after she died, thinking it was too painful to keep it. He regretted that now, suddenly and fiercely. The woman at table 7 was remembering her daughter, who had moved across the country years ago. They didn't talk much anymore. Life had gotten in the way. The music was making her feel that distance, that loss, in a way that made her want to pick up the phone right then and call her. The piece was building toward its conclusion now. The melody was climbing higher and higher, the chords underneath getting richer and fuller. It felt like everything was leading somewhere. Like all the sadness and fear and anger and hope were coming together into one final statement. And then, with 3 powerful chords that rang out through the restaurant, it ended. The last notes hung in the air, fading slowly. She held her hands on the keys even after the sound had disappeared, her eyes still closed, her chest rising and falling with deep breaths. For 3 long heartbeats, nobody moved. Nobody made a sound. The silence was so complete you could have heard a pin drop on the carpet. Then, like a dam breaking, the applause started. It wasn't polite restaurant clapping. It was thunderous. People were on their feet. Some were shouting. The word brava came from multiple tables at once. Someone was actually crying openly now, not even trying to hide it. She opened her eyes slowly, almost confused. For a moment she had forgotten where she was. The music had taken her somewhere else entirely. Coming back to reality felt jarring. The sound of applause washed over her like a wave, and suddenly, the full weight of what had just happened hit her all at once. She sat frozen at the piano bench, her hands still resting on the keys, unable to fully process what was happening around her. The applause kept going, getting louder if anything. People were standing now, all of them, even the ones who had been smirking and whispering just minutes ago. The chef was walking toward her, and there was something in his hand. A glass of water. Her throat was so dry she hadn't even realized it until she saw the glass. He handed it to her wordlessly, and she took it with shaking hands, drinking half of it in one gulp. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he asked quietly, having to lean in close so she could hear him over the continuing applause. "I studied," she managed to say, her voice rough, "at a music school. I had a scholarship." Before he could ask more, something else happened. The elderly woman from table 7 was making her way across the restaurant toward them. She moved slowly, using a cane, but there was determination in every step. The woman's eyes were red from crying, but there was also something fierce in her expression. When she reached the piano, she stopped and just stared for a long moment. Then she spoke, and her voice had a slight accent. European, maybe. Austrian or German? That piece you just played. That was yours, wasn't it? You composed it? She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The woman's face crumpled slightly, more tears coming. I taught piano for 47 years, the woman said. At Juilliard. I've heard thousands of students play. Hundreds of professionals. Some of the best pianists in the world. She paused, wiping her eyes with a napkin. What you just did, that was extraordinary. Not just technically, though your technique is flawless, but the emotion, the composition itself. That's the kind of playing that reminds people why music matters. The chef was looking between them, starting to understand that this wasn't just a random homeless girl who could play piano. This was something else entirely. Juilliard? He repeated. You studied at Juilliard? Before she could answer, the elderly woman spoke again. What's your name, dear? She hesitated. Part of her wanted to stay anonymous, to just take whatever meal they gave her and disappear back into the streets. But something in the woman's eyes made her answer honestly. The woman's reaction was immediate and intense. Her hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God, I knew it. I knew your name sounded familiar. You're the one who disappeared. We've been looking for you. The entire faculty has been asking about you. The restaurant had quieted down now, people returning to their seats but still watching, still listening. The conversation at the piano was like its own performance, and they didn't want to miss it. I had to leave, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. My mother got sick. Really sick. The medical bills. I couldn't afford school anymore. I couldn't afford anything. The words came out in a rush now, like a dam breaking. I lost my apartment. I've been sleeping in my car. I have $17 left. In 3 days, I'm going to lose my storage unit, and my mother's piano is in there. The one I learned on. I can't lose it. But I don't know how to pay for it. I don't know how to pay for anything anymore. She was crying now, couldn't stop herself. All the stress and fear and exhaustion of the past weeks was pouring out. I used to be someone. I used to have a future. And now I'm begging to play piano for food in restaurants, and I don't know how I got here or how to get back. The chef and the elderly woman exchanged a look. The chef disappeared for a moment, and when he came back, he had a cloth napkin that he handed to her. Not a paper napkin. A real cloth one, expensive and soft. She took it and wiped her face, trying to pull herself together. How's your mother now? The elderly woman asked gently. Is she okay? She's better. She's recovered. But she doesn't know. She doesn't know about any of this. About what happened to me. I couldn't tell her. She would have blamed herself, and she was already so sick. The chef had his phone out now, and he was typing something quickly. Then he looked up at her. What's the address of your storage unit? And how much do you owe? She stared at him, confused. Why? Just tell me. She gave him the information, her brain struggling to understand what was happening. He typed more on his phone, then put it away. It's paid, he said simply, for the next 6 months. Your piano is safe. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what he had just said. But you can't. That's considerate payment for the performance, he said. That's the most extraordinary thing that's ever happened in this restaurant. And trust me, we've had some very expensive entertainment here over the years. None of it came close to what you just did. The elderly woman was nodding. And your apartment situation. First month's rent and deposit. I'm taking care of it. I'm not taking no for an answer. I don't understand, she managed to say. Why would you do this? You don't even know me. Because talent like yours doesn't come along often, the woman said firmly. And because you shouldn't have had to choose between caring for your mother and pursuing your gift. No one should have to make that choice. The system failed you, but we're not going to. Other people were approaching now. The man who had been recording on his phone introduced himself as a talent agent. He handed her a business card. Call me tomorrow. I have some people you need to meet. A couple from another table came over. The woman was writing a check right there, using the bar as a surface. For the music scholarship fund at Juilliard, she said, handing it to the elderly woman. Make sure students like her don't have to drop out again. The host who had laughed at her earlier was standing back, watching all of this with a stunned expression. He caught her eye and mouthed 2 words. I'm sorry. She nodded at him. She understood. He had seen a broke, desperate-looking girl and made assumptions. Wrong assumptions, but understandable ones. She had probably looked exactly like someone trying to scam a free meal. How was he supposed to know? The chef was talking to someone on his phone now, his hand cupped over the receiver. When he finished the call, he turned back to her. Okay, first things first. You need to eat. What do you want? Anything on the menu, whatever you want, and don't hold back. You look like you haven't had a proper meal in weeks. She realized he was right. Her hands were trembling. And it wasn't just from emotion anymore. It was from hunger, from exhaustion, from everything. I don't know. What's good? He smiled. Everything's good. But for you, I'm going to make you something special. Something off menu. You just sit here, okay? Don't go anywhere. The elderly woman sat down next to her on the piano bench. We need to talk about your scholarship. About getting you back to Juilliard. About your future. My scholarship is gone, she said. They gave my spot to someone else. No, the woman said firmly. Your spot is still there. We kept it open hoping you'd come back. We just didn't know where you were or how to contact you. She couldn't stop staring at the elderly woman sitting beside her on the piano bench. This was Professor Helena Winters. The Professor Helena Winters, one of the most respected piano teachers in the entire country, maybe the entire world. She had trained concert pianists who now performed in the greatest halls across Europe and Asia. She had won teaching awards. She had written books about piano technique that were used in music schools everywhere. And she was the one who had personally recruited her to Juilliard 3 years ago. She had come to a small competition in a community center, where a nervous 18-year-old girl had played Chopin with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. After the performance, Professor Winters had approached her and said 6 words that changed her life. You need to study with me. Professor Winters, she whispered now. I'm so sorry I disappeared. I wanted to tell you, wanted to explain, but I was so ashamed. I thought I had let you down. Let everyone down. The professor took her hand, holding it between both of hers. Her hands were old, spotted with age, but still strong. Piano teacher hands. Child, you didn't let anyone down. Life happened. Terrible, unfair things happened. But you're still here. You're still playing. You still have that gift. From the kitchen, wonderful smells were starting to drift out. The chef was cooking, and from the sounds of it, he was putting everything he had into it. Pans clanged. Orders were being called out. The kitchen staff had kicked into high gear. I don't have any money for tuition, she said, trying to be practical even though her head was spinning. Even if my spot is still there, I can't pay for housing, for food, for any of it. I already used up all my savings on my mother's medical bills. Professor Winters smiled. The school has created a new program since you left. Several faculty members and I pushed for it. We call it the Family Support Scholarship. It's for students who have family obligations, who need help with living expenses, not just tuition. It covers everything. Housing, food, books, even a monthly stipend. That's amazing. But surely there are other students who need it more than... Stop, the professor said gently but firmly. You need to learn something important. When people want to help you, let them. When opportunities come, take them. You're not taking anything away from anyone else. There's enough help to go around. The chef emerged from the kitchen carrying a plate himself, which apparently was unusual because several staff members looked surprised. He set it down on a small table that someone had quickly set up near the piano. The plate was beautiful. Perfectly cooked salmon with roasted vegetables, a side of creamy risotto, fresh bread with herb butter. It looked like something from a food magazine. Eat, he said simply. We can talk while you eat, but you need to eat. She picked up the fork with shaking hands. The first bite of salmon was so good it almost made her cry again. Real food, proper food, cooked by someone who really knew what they were doing. She had to force herself to slow down, to not just shovel it all into her mouth. Professor Winters waited until she had eaten a few bites before continuing. There's something else you should know about. There's a competition coming up. The Young Artist Competition. It's in 3 months. Winner gets a recording contract and a debut performance at Carnegie Hall. She nearly choked on her risotto. Carnegie Hall? That's for real musicians. Established musicians. You are a real musician, the professor said. What you played tonight proved that. That piece, the one you composed, that's what you should perform in the competition. But I'd need to prepare. I'd need practice time on a good piano. You'll have all of that, the chef interrupted. He gestured around the restaurant. This piano sits silent most days. It's decoration. What a waste, right? You can come here during our off hours. Every morning before we open for lunch, you can practice. For as long as you need. She put down her fork, overwhelmed. Why are you all doing this? You don't even know me. The chef pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. You want the honest truth? That video that guy took on his phone? It's already online. Posted it just a few minutes ago. It already has thousands of views. People are sharing it everywhere, asking who you are, where they can hear more. My restaurant is going to be famous after tonight. He smiled. But that's not really why. The real reason is because what you did tonight reminded me why I got into this business in the first place. It's not about fancy food or expensive wine or impressing rich people. It's about creating moments, experiences, bringing people together around something beautiful. You did that tonight with music. I try to do it with food. We're not that different, you and me. Professor Winters was nodding. And I'm doing it because I've been teaching for 47 years and I've learned to recognize something special when I see it. You have it. That thing that can't be taught. Raw talent, yes, but more than that. You have something to say through your music. A voice, a perspective. The world needs to hear it. She took another bite of food, trying to process everything. An hour ago, she had been standing outside in the cold, wondering if she would eat today. Now she was sitting in a fancy restaurant, surrounded by people who wanted to help her, talking about Carnegie Hall and recording contracts and scholarships. What about my composition? She asked. The piece I played tonight? It's not finished. I have other movements in my head, but I haven't had a chance to write them down properly. I've been doing everything on scraps of paper and in my head. We'll get you proper music paper, Professor Winters said, or a computer with music notation software. Whatever you need. You finish that piece. Make it perfect. That's what you'll perform at the competition. The talent agent who had given her his card earlier came back over. I don't want to interrupt dinner, but I just got off the phone with my office. We want to represent you. We work with concert pianists, composers, musicians of all types. We can help you build a career. I don't have a career, she said. I'm nobody. You're not nobody anymore, he said, turning his phone to show her. The video of her performance now had over 50,000 views. The comment section was exploding. People were calling her a genius, asking where they could hear more. Sharing the video with friends, she stared at the phone screen, not quite believing it. That was her, playing piano in a restaurant, and thousands of people were watching it, caring about it, moved by it. This is insane, she whispered. This is opportunity, Professor Winters corrected, and you're going to seize it. We're going to make sure you do. A waitress brought over dessert without being asked. Chocolate cake with fresh berries. The chef waved away her thanks. On the house. Everything tonight is on the house. You've already paid in full with that performance. She ate the cake slowly, savoring every bite, while Professor Winters talked about the practical details. They would get her enrolled again for the spring semester, which started in January. That gave her a few months to get settled, to practice, to prepare for the competition. The professor already had an apartment in mind, one near campus that would be covered by the scholarship. What about my mother? She asked. She's going to want to know where I suddenly got all this support from. Tell her the truth, Professor Winters said. Tell her you played piano for some people who recognized your talent and wanted to help. That's all she needs to know for now. She'll be proud of you. As she should be. The chef stood up, checking his watch. We need to get back to serving dinner properly. But you stay as long as you want. Finish your food, rest. If you need somewhere to stay tonight, I can have someone arrange a hotel room. I couldn't possibly. You can, and you will, he said firmly but kindly. Tomorrow you can start figuring out the apartment situation. Tonight you sleep in a real bed. That's not negotiable. As he walked away to attend to his other customers, she looked around the restaurant. People were still glancing over at her, but the looks had completely changed. No more pity, no more judgment. Now they looked at her with respect, with curiosity, with interest. The host who had initially laughed at her approached hesitantly. I owe you an apology. A real one. I judged you based on how you looked, and I was completely wrong. What you did tonight was incredible. She nodded, accepting the apology. She understood. She probably would have made the same assumptions in his position. Professor Winters squeezed her hand. Finish your dinner. Then we're going to exchange phone numbers and make plans. Tomorrow we start putting your life back together. But tonight you can just breathe. Just exist. The crisis is over. For the first time in months, she felt something she had almost forgotten. Hope. Real hope. Not the desperate kind that keeps you going when you have no other choice, but the real kind. The kind that comes from knowing things might actually be okay. The chocolate cake sat half-finished on the plate in front of her, but she couldn't eat anymore. Her stomach, unused to rich food after weeks of barely eating, was starting to protest. But she felt more satisfied than she had in months. It wasn't just the food. It was everything. The warmth of the restaurant. The kindness of strangers. The impossible turn her evening had taken. Professor Winters was typing something on her phone, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. The chef had returned to the kitchen but kept glancing out through the service window, checking on her. The restaurant had returned to something resembling normal operation, though people still kept looking over at her table. "Tell me everything," Professor Winters said, setting down her phone. "From the beginning. What happened after your mother got sick?" So she told the story, all of it, not the sanitized version she might have told a stranger, but the real, messy, painful truth. She told her about the diagnosis, about the rare autoimmune disease that the insurance company initially refused to cover treatment for, about the appeals and the denials and the bills that kept coming. "I tried to keep going to school," she said. "For the first month, I thought I could manage both. I'd go to classes during the day, then rush to the hospital at night. I'd practice on headphones in the hospital waiting room. I'd do my homework in the cafeteria at 2 in the morning." She took a sip of water, her throat tight with emotion. "But it wasn't sustainable. My mother needed experimental treatments. $20,000 for the first round. Our insurance wouldn't cover it. The hospital wanted payment up front, so I withdrew my savings. The money I'd been saving since I was 15. Birthday money, summer job money, everything." Professor Winters' face was sad but not pitying. She just listened, let her talk. Even that wasn't enough. I took out loans, but they wanted a co-signer, and my mother obviously couldn't do it. I found loan sharks, basically. People who prey on desperate people. The interest rates were criminal, but I didn't care. I just needed my mother to get treatment. She laughed bitterly. The ironic thing is, it worked. The treatment worked. My mother started getting better. But by then I had dropped out of school. I couldn't pay tuition. Couldn't even pay rent. I got a job at a coffee shop, but minimum wage doesn't cover much when you're drowning in debt. Lost the apartment about 6 weeks ago. Moved into my car. It's an old sedan. Not even comfortable to sleep in, but it was shelter. I'd wash up in gym bathrooms, the ones where you can pay just for a day pass. I'd charge my phone at libraries. I'd eat whatever I could afford, which wasn't much. Professor Winters reached across the table and took both of her hands. "And your mother? She doesn't know about any of this?" She shook her head. "How could I tell her?" She was barely recovering. The guilt would have destroyed her. She would have blamed herself, stopped taking her medications, tried to go back to work too early. I couldn't risk that, so I lied. Told her I took a semester off to focus on a special project. Told her I was staying with friends. Made up excuses for why I couldn't visit often. Every few days I'd call her from a coffee shop or a library, somewhere with good lighting and quiet background. I'd make sure I looked okay on video calls. She thinks I'm doing great. She thinks I'm thriving. She has no idea her daughter has been homeless. The word homeless hung in the air between them. It was the first time she had said it out loud. Homeless, that's what she had been. That's what she still was, technically, even with the hotel room the chef had arranged for tonight. The storage unit was my last connection to before, she continued. My mother's old piano is in there. The upright she bought used when I was 7. It's not worth much money, but it's worth everything to me. I learned to play on that piano. My mother and I would play duets on it. It's the last piece of my old life I haven't lost. She wiped her eyes with the cloth napkin. When I realized I couldn't pay this month's fee, that they were going to auction off everything in the unit, that's when I knew I had hit bottom. That's when I decided to try this. Walking into a restaurant and offering to play for food, it was the most desperate thing I've ever done. It was also the bravest, Professor Winters said quietly. Do you have any idea how much courage that took? To walk in here, face the judgment, risk the humiliation? Most people in your situation would have given up. Would have let pride or fear stop them, but you didn't. The chef had emerged from the kitchen again, this time with a cup of tea. Chamomile. He set it down in front of her without a word, but she saw the understanding in his eyes. He had heard at least part of the story. My mother immigrated here when she was 20, the chef said, sitting down again. She worked 3 jobs to put my brother and me through school. Cleaned houses during the day, worked in a factory at night, did people's laundry on weekends. She never complained. Never said it was too hard. He leaned back in his chair. When I told her I wanted to be a chef, she didn't understand at first. In her mind, cooking was just something you did to survive, not a career. But she supported me anyway. Worked extra hours to help pay for culinary school. She got sick 5 years ago, cancer. And suddenly I was in your exact position. Do I keep pursuing my dream of opening a restaurant, or do I put everything I have into her medical care? I chose her, obviously. She was my mother. His voice got quiet. She died anyway. Despite everything. Despite the money, the treatments, all of it. And for a while I was angry. Angry that the sacrifice didn't matter. Angry that the system forces people to choose between caring for their family and pursuing their own life. But you know what I realized? The sacrifice did matter, not because of the outcome, but because of what it said about who I am, about who you are. We're people who show up for the people we love. That's not a weakness. That's strength. She was crying again, but these tears felt different, cleaner somehow, like something was being released. The restaurant came later, the chef continued, after she died. I used her life insurance money to start it. She would have liked that, I think. Her sacrifice turning into something beautiful. And now this restaurant, named after her, is successful enough that I can help people like you. That's the whole point, isn't it? We help each other, Professor Winters nodded. That's exactly right. And now we're going to help you not just survive, but thrive. We're going to get you back to where you were supposed to be. But first, practical matters. She pulled out a small notebook and pen. Phone number. Give me your phone number. I don't have one anymore. I couldn't pay the bill. Okay, first order of business tomorrow, new phone. I'll handle it. Next, clothes. You'll need proper clothes for going back to school, for interviews, for the competition. Professor, I can't let you pay for all of this. You're not letting me do anything. I'm choosing to do it. There's a difference. Now, sizes. What sizes do you wear? They spent the next 20 minutes going over practical details. What she would need immediately versus what could wait. Professor Winters made lists, sent texts, made phone calls. Within that short time, she had arranged for a phone, a shopping trip with a student volunteer, and a meeting with the financial aid office at the school. The hotel tonight is near campus, the chef added. Tomorrow morning, Professor Winters will meet you there. You'll start getting everything sorted out. In the afternoon, you come here. 2 o'clock. That's when we close between lunch and dinner service. The restaurant will be empty and you can practice on the piano. For how long? As long as you need. 2 hours, 4 hours, whatever. Every day if you want. That piano needs to be played. It's been silent too long. She looked around the restaurant at these people who had been strangers an hour ago and were now rearranging their lives to help her. I don't know how to thank you. I don't know how I'll ever repay this. You already have, Professor Winters said. That performance tonight was payment enough. And going forward, you'll pay it forward. When you're successful, when you're established, you'll help the next struggling musician. That's how this works. The talent agent came back over with a contract. Don't sign anything tonight, he said. Take this home, read it carefully. Have someone look it over. But when you're ready, we'd love to work with you. No pressure. She took the papers, folding them carefully. Everything felt surreal. Like she was going to wake up in her car and realize this had all been a dream. This is real, right? She asked Professor Winters. This is actually happening? The professor smiled. This is real, and this is just the beginning. The hotel room felt like luxury after weeks of sleeping in her car. A real bed. Clean sheets that smelled like lavender. A bathroom with hot water and actual water pressure. She stood in the shower for 20 minutes, just letting the hot water run over her, washing away weeks of accumulated grime and stress. When she finally got into bed, she expected to fall asleep immediately. She was exhausted, but her mind wouldn't stop racing. Everything that had happened kept playing on a loop. The fear of walking into the restaurant, the humiliation of asking to play for food, the first notes on the piano, the applause, the conversations afterward. All of it felt impossible. She picked up the hotel phone and called her mother. It was late, but her mother answered on the second ring. "Hi, Mom. Sweetie, I wasn't expecting to hear from you tonight. Is everything okay?" She took a deep breath. Actually, something happened today. Something big. Over the next 30 minutes, she told her mother an edited version of the truth. Not about being homeless, not about the car or the desperation, but about walking into a restaurant and asking to play piano, about the performance, about Professor Winters being there, about the scholarship being available again. Her mother was quiet for a long moment after she finished. Then, "You've been struggling, haven't you? More than you told me." There was no point lying. "Yeah, I have been. But Mom, I'm okay. And things are going to get better now. I'm going back to school. I'm going to finish what I started. You dropped out because of me, because of my medical bills. I dropped out because I love you, because you're my mother and you needed help. I'd make the same choice again." Her mother's voice was thick with tears. "I'm so proud of you. Not because you're going back to school, because of who you are, because you kept going even when things were impossible." After they hung up, she did fall asleep. Deep, dreamless sleep that lasted 10 hours straight. Professor Winters picked her up at 9 the next morning. They started with the phone store, then grabbed coffee and breakfast at a small cafe near campus. Real breakfast. Eggs, toast, fruit. She ate every bite. "There's something I want to talk to you about," Professor Winters said as they ate. "The young artist competition I mentioned last night. I wasn't just making conversation. I really think you should enter. And I think you should perform that piece you played last night. But it's not finished. It's just one movement. Then finish it. You have 3 months. Write the other movements, complete the composition, make it into a full piece that tells the complete story." She considered this. It would need at least 3 more movements. Maybe 4. The one I played last night was just the beginning. The waiting part. There needs to be the crisis, the struggle, the resolution. Exactly. And you've lived all of those parts. You know that story intimately. You just need to translate it into music. They spent the morning at the school sorting out paperwork. The financial aid office confirmed everything Professor Winters had said. The scholarship was ready. Everything would be covered. She would start classes in January, just 3 months away. At 2 o'clock, she walked into the restaurant. It looked different in daylight, emptier and somehow more intimate. The chef was waiting for her along with a young woman she didn't recognize. "This is my assistant manager," the chef said. "She'll let you in every afternoon. You just knock on the back door. Practice as long as you want." The piano sat waiting in the corner, looking even more beautiful in the afternoon light streaming through the windows. She sat down at the bench, lifted the fallboard, and placed her hands on the keys. For a moment, she just sat there, feeling the weight of everything that had changed in 24 hours. Then she started to play. Not the piece from last night. Something new. The next movement. The crisis part. The fear and anger and desperation. Her hands found the notes almost automatically. This was the part of the story where everything fell apart. Where the hospital bills came in. Where the savings ran out. Where hope started to fade. The music was darker, more dissonant. Chords crashed together. The melody fractured and fragmented. She played for 3 hours straight, only stopping when her hands started to cramp. By the time she finished, she had the basic structure of the second movement. It needed refinement, needed polish, but the bones were there. Over the next few weeks, a routine developed. Mornings were for apartment hunting with the help of other students. She found a small studio near campus that was covered by the scholarship. It wasn't fancy, but it had a window that got good morning light and enough space for a keyboard. The storage unit had been paid for, just as the chef promised. When she finally went there to retrieve her things, she sat at her mother's old piano and cried. Really cried. All the tears she had been holding back for months. The piano was exactly as she had left it. Dusty, slightly out of tune, but whole. Safe. She had it moved to her new apartment. It barely fit through the door, but they managed. Having it there made the space feel like home. Afternoons were for practice at the restaurant. She worked on the competition piece, adding layers, refining passages, developing the themes. The second movement grew from its rough beginnings into something powerful. The third movement came next, the part about fighting back, about refusing to give up. The fourth movement was about transformation, about becoming something different through struggle. The chef would often sit in the back while she practiced, listening while he prepped vegetables or planned menus. Sometimes other staff members would drift in during her practice sessions. The assistant manager said it was the highlight of her day, getting to hear the music. The video from that first night continued to spread online. It had been shared millions of times now. Her story, or parts of it at least, had been picked up by news outlets. People called her the restaurant pianist or the homeless musician who played for food. She wasn't entirely comfortable with the attention, but Professor Winters said to embrace it. People love a comeback story, the professor said. Let them love yours. It might open doors for you. Professor Winters continued to mentor her, not just on the piano but on life. They met weekly for lessons, but also just for coffee, for conversation. The professor introduced her to other faculty members, to potential collaborators, to people in the music world who could help her career. The talent agent's contract sat on her desk for 2 weeks before she signed it. She had read it carefully, had a lawyer who volunteered at a legal aid clinic look it over. Everything was fair, everything was legitimate. So she signed. Within days, the agent had booked her for a small concert at a local performance space. Nothing major, just a 100-seat venue. But it would be her first real performance since dropping out of school. The tickets sold out in 3 hours. She practiced obsessively for that concert. Not just the new composition, but other pieces too. Chopin, Rachmaninoff, some of her own earlier compositions. The night of the performance, she wore a simple black dress that Professor Winters had helped her pick out. Nothing fancy, but professional and elegant. The performance space was intimate with good acoustics. She could see every face in the audience. Professor Winters was there, front row. The chef was there with several staff members from the restaurant. Her mother had come, not knowing the full story, but so proud she couldn't stop smiling. She played the completed sections of her new composition first. The 4 movements she had finished. The audience was silent throughout, transfixed. When she finished, the applause was immediate and genuine. Several people were crying. She saw her mother in the audience, tears streaming down her face, her hands pressed to her heart. After that concert, things accelerated. The agent booked her for more performances. Small venues at first, then bigger ones. Other musicians started reaching out about collaborations. A composer asked if she would perform one of his pieces at an upcoming festival, and through it all, she kept returning to the restaurant every afternoon. Kept practicing on that Steinway piano. Kept working on her competition piece. The 5th and final movement was the hardest to write. It needed to be about hope, about redemption, about finding yourself after being lost. But it couldn't be cheesy or simple. It needed to acknowledge that struggle doesn't just end, that recovery is complicated, that happy endings are more nuanced than fairy tales suggest. She worked on that final movement for 6 weeks, revising and refining until it felt right. When she finally played the complete piece through for the first time, start to finish, all 5 movements, she knew it was ready. Not perfect, maybe, but ready. Honest. True. Professor Winters listened to the complete piece during one of their lessons. When it ended, she didn't speak for a long moment. Then she said simply, "That's the one. That's what you perform at the competition." The competition was now just 2 weeks away. The backstage area of Carnegie Hall smelled like old wood and new possibilities. She stood in the wings, dressed in a deep blue gown that Professor Winters had insisted on buying for her. Through the curtain, she could hear the audience settling into their seats, the rustling of programs, quiet conversations, the occasional cough. Carnegie Hall. She was actually here, about to walk onto one of the most famous stages in the world. The Young Artist competition had been 3 months ago. She had performed her 5-movement composition, the piece she had titled From Midnight to Morning. The judges had been unanimous. First place. The prize included this debut performance and a recording contract with a major classical music label. But the past 3 months hadn't just been about this moment. So much had happened. So much had changed. She had returned to school in January, jumping back into classes like she had never left. It was hard at first, catching up on what she had missed, readjusting to academic life. But it was also wonderful. Being surrounded by other musicians, having access to practice rooms and pianos, learning from professors who actually cared about their students. She had also started teaching. Once a week, she went to a community center in a neighborhood that reminded her of where she grew up. She taught piano to kids who couldn't afford private lessons, kids who came from struggling families, kids who might be tempted to give up on music because life got in the way. She told them her story, Not to brag, but to show them that struggle doesn't mean failure, that setbacks are temporary, that talent and hard work can survive even the hardest circumstances. Some of them listened with wide eyes. Others were skeptical. But they all kept showing up week after week, getting a little better each time. The chef had become a real friend. Not just someone who let her practice at his restaurant, but someone she talked to about life, about choices, about finding meaning in work. He had expanded his restaurant's entertainment, bringing in live music several nights a week. Local musicians, mostly. People who needed a platform, a chance to be heard. Professor Winters had become like a second mother to her. They met twice a week now for lessons and for life talks. The professor had introduced her to so many people in the music world. Conductors, composers, performers, critics. Each connection opened new doors, created new opportunities. The video from that first night, the one recorded on a phone in the restaurant, had been viewed over 100 million times now. It had become one of those internet phenomena that takes on a life of its own. People who had never cared about classical music suddenly wanted to hear more. The recording label was already talking about making that restaurant performance into something official, professionally recorded. But more importantly, the video had sparked something. Other musicians had started sharing their own stories of struggle. A violinist who had been homeless, a cellist who had fled a war zone, a composer with a disability that made performance difficult. The message was spreading. Talent doesn't only come from privilege. Beauty can emerge from hardship. Art survives even when everything else falls apart. Her relationship with her mother had deepened too. Once the truth came out, once her mother understood the full extent of what had happened, there had been tears, guilt, apologies, but also understanding. They talked more now. Really talked. About hard things, about real things. Her mother had started volunteering at a hospital, helping families navigate the confusing world of medical bills and insurance. Turning her own painful experience into something helpful for others. A stage manager appeared beside her. 5 minutes, she nodded, her stomach flipping. She had performed dozens of times over the past months. Small venues, medium venues, even a few large ones. But this was different. This was Carnegie Hall. This was the dream every classical musician has. In the audience tonight were critics from major newspapers, representatives from record labels, other musicians she admired. And right there in the third row, she knew, sat her mother and Professor Winters. The chef had come too, along with several staff members from the restaurant. The host who had initially laughed at her was there, the elderly woman from Table 7 who had been crying during that first performance. They were all there because of one desperate moment 6 months ago, because she had been hungry and broke and out of options, because she had walked into a restaurant and asked to play piano for a meal. 2 minutes. She rolled her shoulders, shook out her hands. The nervousness was starting to transform into focus. This was what she had trained for her entire life. This was why she had practiced until her fingers bled as a teenager. Why she had given up parties and social events to sit at a piano. Why she had fought so hard to get back to this path even when everything else fell apart. The stage manager gave her a nod. "You're on." She walked onto the stage and the applause was immediate, warm, welcoming. The lights were bright but not blinding. She could see faces in the first few rows. Her mother already crying. Professor Winters smiling with pride. The chef giving her a thumbs up. The piano sat center stage. A Steinway, of course, even more beautiful than the one at the restaurant. She sat down on the bench, adjusted it slightly, took a deep breath. The audience settled into silence. Perfect silence. The kind of silence that only happens in great concert halls, where the acoustics are so good you can hear a pin drop. She placed her hands on the keys, finding the starting position for From Midnight to Morning. This was her story. Her struggle, her transformation, translated into music. 5 movements that took the listener from darkness to light, from despair to hope, from being lost to being found. The first notes were soft, just like that night in the restaurant. The melody that represented waiting, hoping, holding on when everything seems impossible. But now it was refined, polished, perfected. Every phrase exactly as she wanted it. As she played, she wasn't thinking about technique or about the audience or about the critics taking notes. She was back in that hospital room, sitting beside her mother's bed at 3 in the morning. She was back in her car, trying to sleep while rain pounded on the roof. She was back standing outside the restaurant in the cold, gathering courage to walk through the door. The second movement began, the crisis. The chords crashed together, representing everything falling apart. But even in the darkness of this movement, there were hints of light, small melodic fragments that suggested strength, resilience, the refusal to completely give up. The third movement was the fight. Not angry but determined. This was the part about choosing to keep going even when it seemed pointless, about practicing on a broken keyboard in a car, about believing that somehow, some way, there would be a path forward. The fourth movement was transformation. This was the restaurant night, the moment everything changed. The melody soared here, lifting up and up, representing possibility returning, but it wasn't simple or easy. The harmonies were complex, acknowledging that change is complicated, that help can be hard to accept, that rebuilding takes time. And then the fifth movement, the finale. This was standing on the other side of struggle, changed but not broken, stronger for having survived. The themes from all the earlier movements came back here but transformed. The waiting melody was now confident. The crisis chords were now resolved. The fight theme was now triumphant. The piece built to its conclusion, all five movements coming together in a final statement that was both powerful and gentle. It ended not with a bang but with a simple, beautiful melody. The same melody from the beginning but now peaceful, complete, home. The final notes rang out through Carnegie Hall, fading slowly into silence. She held her hands on the keys, eyes closed, letting the moment settle. Then she lifted her hands and opened her eyes. For 3 heartbeats, nothing. Silence. Then the audience erupted. Everyone was on their feet. The applause was deafening, thunderous. People were shouting. She could see her mother sobbing openly, Professor Winters beaming with pride, the chef wiping his eyes. She stood and bowed, overwhelmed by the response. The applause continued. Flowers were brought onto the stage. She bowed again. And again. The audience wouldn't stop. Finally, after what felt like forever, the applause began to fade. She walked off stage, her legs shaking, adrenaline making her hands tremble. Backstage, people crowded around her. Congratulations from every direction. The stage manager shaking her hand. Other performers waiting in the wings for their own debuts, looking at her with awe. But she pushed through them all, heading for the stage door that led to the audience area. She needed to see her mother, to see Professor Winters, to see all the people who had helped her get here. When she finally found them, her mother grabbed her in a hug so tight it was hard to breathe. "I'm so proud of you," her mother whispered. So incredibly proud. Professor Winters was there too, and the chef and so many others. They all wanted to talk, to celebrate, to share this moment. But more than anything, she just wanted to stand there with them. These people who had believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself. Later that night, after the post-concert reception, after the interviews with journalists, after the photos and the handshakes and all of it, she found herself back at the restaurant. It was closed, but the chef had left the back door unlocked for her, knowing she might want to come.